Now, for the rest of the hour, we are honored to have Alex Abella on the radio broadcast with us. He's a New York Times notable book author, Emmy-nominated TV reporter, and screenwriter. Alex Abella is the author of Soldiers of Reason, The Rand Corporation, The American Empire, a study of the world's most influential think tank, published by Harcourt. Alex was the first journalist to have full access to Rand's files in Santa Monica, California, and they did not like the response that they got when the book came out. They did not like the results. Abella's nonfiction work includes Shadow Enemies, a nonfiction account of a plot by Adolf Hitler. I've read about this, to start a wave of terror and destruction in the United States. Born in Cuba, Alex migrated with his family to the United States when he was age 10. And we really appreciate this accomplished researcher and writer and news reporter for joining us. AlexAbella.com is his website. Alex, good to have you here with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure. I was listening to your reports before. It's really scary what's going on.
Very suspicious, these shootings happening every time universities try to say that students can have concealed carry, and when they were having a prominent concealed carry person speaking at the law school tonight.
Amazing, amazing. You know, it's just like another step into, you know, the consolidation of the military-industrial complex, which is, you know, what came out of Rand. I mean, this is like, my book, it deals with the birthplace of the military-industrial complex. And it's funny, too, that in a way it took a former general, Eisenhower, to warn us against this, and, you know, and yet, you know, here we are, all these years later.
Well, for those that don't know, when you watch a movie like Dr. Strangelove made by Stanley Kubrick, they call it the Bland Corporation,
right.
Has a report where they talk about we can nuke Russia and only lose 10 to 20 million Americans. That's really based, from my research, but I want you, who knows far more than I, on real reports put out by Rand and some of these shadowy figures that started it. You've got the floor. Break down the history of Rand and why it's so important.
Well, I think, you know, Rand is important for a number of reasons. I mean, dating back, it's the most influential think tank in America, if not in the world. It shaped our policy of nuclear deterrence. It came up with the concept of counterinsurgency, laid the foundation for the Internet, was harbored game theory, came up with something called systems analysis, which revolutionized the U.S. government. But above all, the main thing that it's really, really, really important, which is something that perhaps I should have emphasized even more in the book, but it's very clear there. They came up with a foundation for the wave of financial disasters that we find ourselves in, something called rational choice theory, which was developed by a Nobel Prize winner named Kenneth Arrow, who came up with something called Arrow's stratagem, which in a way went against the precepts of Marxism, and yet turned loose this whole wave of deregulation, of people just thinking that, you know, they're only in it for themselves, and like overturn all the concepts on which this country had been based on. That, I think, is their major contribution to, unfortunately, to our national fabric.
When you say it's the most influential think tank in the United States and probably the world, that is not an exaggeration. In fact, it may even be an understatement. From my research, Stanley Kubrick was obsessed with the Rand Corporation, got a lot of the material for several of his films from it, because he realized that they were charting so much of our technological development and sat at the top of the capstone for the scientific and technological elite that Eisenhower talked about in his speech that were controlling the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower quotes about military-industrial complex being dangerous. You know, those are well known, but the rest of his farewell address gets into the scientific technological elite that was taking over the system, because he was reading their reports, he was seeing what they had to say. Let's start at the beginning. Why did you want to look at Rand Corporation? How were you able to get in to see their internal annals when no one else had been able to do it? And let's walk through all the different things that they developed, including, didn't they develop the idea for mid-air refueling?
Yes, absolutely. And also the idea of second nuclear strike deterrence. And that came out of something called a basing study, which highlighted the weaknesses in our national defense system against a surprise strike by the Russians. Of course, never mind that the Russians, you know, didn't have enough weapons to really do all this, but in any case, had they been able to, they would have been able to.
And not to mention, of course, they helped develop the current COG plan that Northcom uses to militarize and take over our entire society by building a second secretive government.
Well, you know, I think you got a point right there. From the very beginning, you know, Rand has been involved with people who have wanted to create an alternative, a secret government. I mean, for crying out loud, you know, it's like one of the major givers of funds, the people who funded the organization, was the Ford Foundation, and its first president Geither, who really believed, you know, in a one-world government controlled by technocrats. I mean, it's really chilling when you go back and you realize, my God, this is the way that it's been going on since the late 1940s. It's amazing. And Rand came up, was developed 1946 as an adjunct of the United States Air Force because there was a general named Hap Arnold who wanted to create the equivalent of the Manhattan Project. As you know, Manhattan Project was the one that came up with the atomic bomb. And what he wanted is that he wanted a combination of military and civilian scientists who would be able to come up with new weapons of destruction. Specifically, they were interested in intercontinental missiles. So they came up with the idea of having this outfit then that would receive money from the military, but actually would be a civilian thing, because he realized that most civilian scientists would not want to work under the strictures of the U.S. Armed Forces. So they set up RAND, which, by the way, the acronym, it means Research and Development. Of course, you know, there's no development. It's always been research. In 1946, and it was housed at Douglas Aircraft here in Santa Monica, because the guy Mr. Douglas, happened to be married to Arnold's daughter. So, you know, they were relations. In any case, they set it up here at Douglas Aircraft. And within a couple of years, Rand was doing so much work for the military that Douglas Aircraft, the company, felt that, you know, its own livelihood was being endangered. So they had to spin it off. And then to spin it off, they went then to the Ford Foundation and to Wells Fargo Bank and got loans and got just outright gifts also from Henry Ford himself. And with that money, then they were able to set up and become independent as a place where they would develop, you know, like new weapons of destruction. And it's been going on ever since. I mean, Bernard Brody, who was the main, who's been called the father of nuclear deterrence, worked there for a while. And as I said, they developed systems analysis, which is a way of, you know, of viewing problems in their context instead of just individually, and and seeing which is the best way to arrive at a result, but all numerically based.
Well, Mr. Abella, I want to go over the fact that they have, you know, literally charted the militarization of police. I mean, almost every policy we see, they charted the course for that. But let's go back, because we're about to go to break. Let's go back to what you talked about, the Ford Foundation and its founder. Tell us about him. And they've had congressional hearings on this, where they openly want global government. I mean, when you actually go to the documents, that's what it says.
That's right.
And so let's talk about their master plan for the planet and what type of documents you saw when you were researching.
Well, the documents are all there. I mean, these things are not hidden, and these are public documents that you can see on which, you know, Geither. There's been a lot of research on this, in which Geither, who was the first president of the Ford Foundation and who was one of the founders of the Rand Corporation, also, you know, was an advocate of a one-world government, and so was John Williams, who was the intellectual powerhouse behind the Rand Corporation. And John Williams, who was the mathematician, he advocated nuking the Soviet Union, and then again forming, you know, a one-world government that will be again ruled by technocrats. So it's been there right from the beginning, and there's no avoiding it. And it's the militarization of the country, and it's just appalling. That's one of the things that I point out in the book.
Well, you've just hit the key here. And again, you were allowed into their very annals, the nexus from Rand to Ford. The Ford documents came out in the 77 hearings in Congress, and the right-wing media, Rush Limbaugh, all of them for decades, said no global government exists. Now they're forced to admit it because the world government's in the open, but they claim it's low-level communist professors.
Oh, please.
When the Pentagon created at Presidio the UN, the Pentagon created the plan for world government. Meanwhile, they've got all these right-wingers saying the Pentagon's fighting world government. They gave birth to this corporate world government. And you've got Tiny Tim Geithner, whose family was involved at the Ford Foundation, who is now the head of the Treasury.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's an old relationship. Not only that, and this is what I want to go back to what I mentioned before. They laid the theoretical foundation for this so that people would eventually accept it as being the right way to be.
Well, Alex, this is Bombshell. I want to tell folks how to get your book. And I really want to thank Tommy Pilata, who's met you and talked to you, for recommending you for the show, because just amazing on-spot, on-target research. We're going to come right back to you after the break so you can continue to discuss this. But I mean, they're the people charting and designing our world. Global corporate dictatorship. We just got off the phone with Professor John Lott. I may go into fourth-hour overdrive. He was in the middle of a major press conference of some type, being harried by reporters. He was going to speak tonight until the shooting happened. I have the Army, it was leaked by WikiLeaks, manual where they teach Army captains how to stage shootings. Operation Northwoods, how to shoot U.S. citizens and blame it on Cuban nationals to go to war with Cuba. I'm telling you, this thing stinks to high heaven, but I'm not getting off into that. And I'm just amazed by our guests. This is a short segment, long segment coming up. Alex Abella, he has written the Bombshell book. I've read several chapters online, but I haven't gotten it yet. I'm going to read it. But just everything he's talking about jives with my research. But he was the only... Alex, before we get into systems analysis and all of this and the world government, how did you get in? Tommy Pilata told me some of the story.
Well, the story was that, I just finished doing my previous book. This book is called Soldiers of Reason. The previous one was called Shadow Enemies, which was, the one about the terrorists that were sent here by Hitler, a personal mission from Hitler right after Pearl Harbor to start a wave of terror in the United States with, that landed on 2 U-boats, one in Long Island and one down in Florida. And, but the guy who was heading the whole thing flipped. He went over to the FBI, but the FBI wouldn't listen to him. So he had to personally go down to Washington. And then, so it was like a ticking time bomb after that.
And the Germans wanted to blow up ammunition dumps.
Yes. Oh, not only that, they also wanted to blow up the aqueduct, the waterworks in New York City. They wanted to put bombs in train stations, in major Jewish-owned department stores, which back then in New York meant probably most of them. It's amazing what they wanted to do. So it was like this whole FBI race trying to, first of all, they didn't believe the guy. Then when they did believe him, then they had to find all the other people that had scattered all over the country. So it was a fascinating story. In any case.
Well, that's how research works. You're doing something on one thing, and then it leads you to something entirely different.
Absolutely. So I was citing books for that book when I saw that, because I co-wrote that, and a friend of my co-author was there, and this person happened to be fairly highly placed within the RAND organization. And I realized, oh my God, the last time I heard about RAND, I was back at Columbia. I was in college. And, they were like masters of deception and this and that. I was thinking, I wonder if anybody's done anything about that. And so I started looking up, the research, doing some research, whether anybody had written about it. And apparently nobody had for a long, long time. And I approached them, and much to my surprise, they said, yes, we'll do it. And at the time, they told me this was either the smartest or the dumbest move we have ever made. I don't know. That's for others to decide. In any case, they opened up their files, and they were totally cooperative. I have nothing bad to say about that. And however, I do think that they expected a different perspective. I laid down the facts just as they are, but I think that they expected me to come to different conclusions. So
you literally got a first-class ticket on that express elevator down the rabbit hole.
That's right. Very good. Very well put. That's exactly how I felt, because the times you read these things and you go, how could this be true? How could they be? It's like... some of the plans that were gestated over there at RAND are just, even like 50 years later, you read them and you say, how could anybody ever think of anything like this? Not only, obviously, control the population, but when you talk about nuclear destruction, about nuclear holocaust, how we can survive even if 50 million people die, because all of them will be dead, but yet we'll be surviving. And I'm thinking, this is like insane. And of course, that's one of the things that Eisenhower was against, because Eisenhower, having been a general, he knew what death was all about. South.
Oh, yeah, Curtis LeMay, for those that don't know, he wanted to have nuclear war, and a lot of them did, and the Rand Corporation was there going, literally the scene from Dr. Strangelove where the general's saying, look, let's have the nuclear war. It's going to be great. We've got lots of mine shaft underground bases. There'll be 10 women for every man.